Okay, so for yin today, grab any props that you have, blocks, blankets, bolsters, strap, whatever you have, and we'll see what we use. And let's start today on our stomachs. So you'll lie down on your stomach. Actually, before you do that, sorry, come back up, hands and knees. Let's put something underneath the hips. So I'm going to use a bolster, but maybe you use blankets or something similar to a bolster. If you have a bolster and a blanket, you could take the blanket, roll it up. So it's like a roll like this, or it could be a towel, and you put that at the back of the mat. And then you come back to hands and knees. Once you come back to hands and knees, if you're using the ankle roll, you'll bring the top of the foot onto this roll and it'll just lift the feet. You can do this without anything underneath the feet. The bolster needs to go underneath the hips, not the belly. So as you glide forward, set the hips down onto the bolster or whatever you're using. Make sure the belly's ahead of it. It'll get you sick if you rest the belly right onto the bolster. So you want that to be free. And then as you come down, one hand on top of the other, rest the forehead down onto the hands. If this is uncomfortable for whatever reason, you could bring the arms down by the sides and turn the head one direction and stay this way. But if this works, you get more of an opening in the upper body. So maybe you stay there. So once you have yourself set up, start to close the eyes. Take a deep breath in through the nose. And a long breath out through the nose. 2 more like that together. Deep breath in. Slow breath out. Inhale in through the nose. And back out through the nose. Keep going with this breath. Starting to feel the shape of the back bend come into the body. So the hips are lifted. Knees are on the ground. Upper body is on the ground. And you don't really have to do anything here. You're just letting whatever you have underneath the hips keep you in the back bend. So with these longer holds in yin yoga, it's important for us to stay soft in the pose. So not going as far in as you possibly can, staying away from your edge. This pose is set up so that you can't really take it too far. But some of the other poses, you'll be driving the pose a little bit more. And we want you to go at a really low speed. So that you manage the level of intensity in the whole practice in the body. And let's lift the head up, bring the hands underneath you. You'll come back to hands and knees, to remove the props. So you won't need any props for the next pose. You can set the bolster off to the side. If you're using something underneath the feet, set that off to the side. Come back to lying down on your stomach so you're flat, and bring the left arm just in line with the shoulder. So left hand and left shoulder are in line. And then you'll turn the head to the left, rest the left side of the head down onto the mat. Right hand is just on the mat underneath the shoulder. You can bring the feet and the legs together and start to roll back onto this left shoulder. So you're getting an opening in the left shoulder, left chest. But remember, this is a pose that you can go too far into too soon. So maybe start to come forward toward the mat, finding a position that doesn't feel like you're all the way in, but you're gently coming in to the pose with ease. Legs can be relaxed. And we'll all be in a different place with this. So if you feel like you want to use the right foot, the top foot as a kickstand, it can go behind you. It can go in front of you. Or if it's comfortable, just keeping one leg stacked on top of the other, you can do that. You can let the nose come down more toward the ground. Eyes can be closed or softly open. Trying your best not to look around. It keeps the mind busy and we're trying to slow things down. Giving the body space to heal and open. You'll start to roll back onto your stomach slowly. And we'll switch sides. So left hand comes in, right arm reaches out. Look at the right hand, try to get it in line with the right shoulder as best you can, and then start to rest the right side of the head down onto the mat. Feet can come together so the legs are together, and you'll slowly start to roll back onto this right shoulder, finding that opening in the right side chest. So feel your way into it. You might not land in the same exact spot to get the same sensation that you got on the first side, and that's okay. Yoga isn't really about the way it looks, it's about the way it feels. So you know yourself best, and you know if one side's uneven. And if that's the case, then It'll definitely look different side to side, but go for the same similar type of opening, what that feeling is. And maybe check in with yourself, make sure you're not driving too deep into the pose. Knowing that it builds over time. We'll start to roll back onto our stomach. Go slow as you transition. No need to rush. And then you'll make your way back up to hands and knees, tabletop. Setting up for cat-cow. So we'll just get some movement in the spine before we move on. So stack the shoulders over the wrists, hips over the knees. On the inhale, reach the heart forward, lift the tail. On the exhale, round the spine, chin in toward the chest. So going back and forth on your own with your own breath. You don't need to stay with me. Just keep it slow. Your breath is still in and out through the nose, up and down the back of the throat. Those long inhales and long exhales. We'll do one more cycle. Coming back to tabletop, neutral spine, we'll come into melting heart pose. If that pose doesn't work well for you, you can always do Sphinx pose, lying down on the mat with the forearms on the mat. If you're okay with melting heart pose, keep the hips right over the knees the whole time. You bring the forearms down to the mat. Belly hugs in here. So that's how you keep the lower back long, and you can feel the difference. If you let the belly go down toward the mat, the hips lift up, hug the belly in, and you start to feel that length in the lower back. So you can stay right here, but if you want that upper body opening, start to walk the elbows forward, bring the forehead down to the mat. So now you're in the shape. Slight toning of the belly. And you start to feel not only the back bend, but the upper body opening. So we just got into the shoulders in one direction. Now we have the arms going forward, up overhead, and getting into the shoulders in a different direction. All while getting the benefits of the back bend.
And for this last bit of the hold, you can stay where you are. If you feel like you're ready for something more, you could bring the hands together like prayer, walk the elbows forward, and then bring the hands back behind the head. Make sure to keep toning the belly so the lower back stays long. Hands come back down to the mat if they're back behind the head. Lift the head up, start to walk the elbows in so they're underneath the shoulders, and then come back up to hands and knees. So we'll all be in hands and knees. This next one, you'll want a bolster or something like it. I'll give you another option if you don't have a bolster. So hands and knees, bolsters the long way in front of you. Bring both knees over to the left and sit onto this right hip. So legs are bent. If you have a blanket, you could take a blanket and put some padding between the knees. That can feel really nice in a pose like this. So bolster or whatever you have is all the way up against the right hip, and you're on the side of the right hip. Hands are down on each side of the bolster. Lengthen the heart forward so you feel that length in the spine. Start to come down onto the forearms. Keep reaching the heart forward. It's a twist. So you could bring the left side of the head down onto the bolster and rest. If that's too much for the neck, then turn the head the other way. You're still in a twist, and bring the right side of the head onto the bolster. So if you don't have a bolster, you can come onto your back, lying down on your back, and then just scooting the hips to the left, knees to the right. And that's a reclined twist. Arms are just resting outside the bolster. They don't need to do anything. Legs are heavy. If you have the head turned all the way around, lift it, bring the right side of the head onto the bolster, resting here for the last couple breaths. And you'll start to walk the hands in just enough so you can push yourself away from the bolster. And then bring the right hand over to the left side of the bolster. You'll turn around, coming to seated on both hips, and then just bring the knees all the way over to the other side. Left hip up against the bolster, left hand goes outside of the bolster, lengthen the spine, legs are still bent. If you have padding there, you can keep it there. And then slowly keeping the chest reaching forward, start to come forward onto the forearms, elbows, and then up to here, up to you. Once you get here, you can turn the head to the left, resting the right side of the head on the bolster, or keep the left side of the head on the bolster. It's all about the neck. So see how the neck feels. Close the eyes, start to settle in. And if you start with a twist in the neck and you feel like over time it just becomes too much, you lift the head and turn it back the other way. If you have the head turned all the way around, start to lift it, bring the left side of the head down onto the bolster. And we'll walk the hands in, pressing yourself back up, lifting the chest and the head away. So set the bolster off to the side. If you have padding between the knees, you can set that toward the back of the mat. And then you'll come to seated, turning to face forward on your mat. Coming to a cross-legged seat. So let's bring the left shin in front of the right. Sit side to side a couple of times till you feel even on the sit bones. And you can always prop the hips up if you want to sit on a block, especially if the hips are really tight. So have those nearby. Then from here, reach the arms all the way up. Take an inhale. And on the exhale, start to come forward. So you're folding forward, putting some weight on the hip opening. Come to a gentle place. So this is our first major hip opening. You know you're here for a little bit, so don't feel like you have to go all the way in. Just go part of the way. Let the head and the neck go. Another great way to use blocks is underneath the hands or the forearms, especially the forearms if you're down low enough. It just keeps you from falling forward too far, too fast. You can always adjust the height of them as you start to come naturally deeper into the pose. You could also use them to support the forehead. And some of us might be feeling the hip opening without leaning forward, and that's an okay place to be too. Start to walk the hands in, lifting the head and the chest. If you have blocks underneath the hands or the chest, just set those off to the side. Bring the hands back behind you. Separate the feet wide, like the width of the mat, and then bring the knees side to side, windshield wipers. So you were there for a little while. We're going to stay in the hips. So you want this movement now. And then you'll come back to center, bring the right shin just the way it was before, like your easy cross-legged seat, but this left leg comes out to the side. So left knee kind of in line with the left hip, if it's not too much, right knee in line with the right hip facing forward. And then you can see my feet. If you bring your feet in toward the body, it's easier. If you bring it out and you have a more 90 degree shape with the legs, it's harder. So listen to your hips, square the chest forward, and you're naturally going to lean over to the right. Some of us will lean way far over, and that's fine if you need to, but you're trying to get the chest upright without too much force. So maybe you stay leaning to the right. Blocks can also go underneath the hands. That left hip is going to be lifted away from the mat, but there is a little bit of momentum going down toward the mat. So you're not trying to get it all the way down, but there is some energy to try to get that left hip down. So we're externally rotating the right hip, right leg, and internally rotating the left leg.
Eyes can be closed. Just stay upright for this one. Deer pose. You have the eyes closed. Slowly start to blink open the eyes. You'll take this left hand back behind you. So you're facing the side of the mat if you're on one. And now you can bring the knees side to side. Feet are already wide. If they're not, widen them. Back to your windshield wipers. And you'll definitely feel a difference in one hip compared to the other. Then you'll come back to facing forward. So deer pose facing the front of the mat. Just bring the left knee towards the right knee, come forward toward hands and knees. So once you get to hands and knees, take the bolster, bring it underneath you the wide way. So hands are in front of the bolster, knees are behind the bolster. You want to leave plenty of room on the mat ahead of you. Walk the hands forward so they're ahead of the shoulders, tuck the toes, lift the hips up and back. Downward facing dog as a transition. So we'll play with single pigeon. You'll lift that right leg up and back. So three-legged down dog. And then bring that right shin and foot ahead of the bolster if you can. If you're not using a bolster, skip it. That's fine. Once you get onto the bolster, you're trying to even out the hips on the bolster so they feel level. Top of the foot rests down on the mat. Start to reach the chest forward. You can come down a little lower in your single pigeon if you want to. Blocks are really helpful with that. So you could just rest the forearms on the blocks if it feels like it's too low to bring the forearms down to the mat. You could also build something underneath the chest, the head, whatever you want in your single pigeon. If you're feeling anything in that right knee, it's talking to you, come onto your back and do thread the needle, crossing the right ankle on top of the left thigh. It's the same shape, but you don't put that kind of weight on the knee. And some of us can do single pigeon without feeling anything in the knee, and that's ideal.
We'll start to come out of single pigeon, bringing the hands to the mat, setting any props you have in front of you out of the way, tuck the back toes, lift the hips up, send that right leg back, downward facing dog. And then here's where you can move the right leg however you want. So maybe that's pedaling out the feet, lifting one heel, descending the other. Some people like to lift the leg, take big circles with that right knee going in one direction and then the other, especially after a longer hold like we just did. But there was a lot of prep before we got into this. So the hip was ready. All right, feet back down to the mat, come back to hands and knees, set the bolster off to the side, come back to seated, cross-legged seat, but this time right shin in front of left shin. So right shin in front of left, switching it up. Reach the arms all the way up. Start to fold over the legs. Take your time coming into it. No need to rush. Feel free to use blocks. I did the armrest last time. I'm going to do it again on this side. I enjoyed that. Close the eyes. Let the head and the neck go. And start to work your way back up to seated. If you have anything in front of you, set it off to the side. Bring the hands back behind you. Separate the feet wide. Windshield wipers, knees side to side. And you'll come back up. So left shin goes in front of you, right shin goes off to the side. So back to deer pose, 90-90. You can lean way over to the left, especially to start to get the leg set up. So maybe the feet come in close to the body, or maybe you move the feet away from you, getting a 90-degree angle on each leg. As you lean over to the left, you can start to play with coming upright with the chest, just enough to where you start to feel the hip opening in a good place for your body. Keeping the chest lifted wherever you are, close the eyes, start to settle in. It's that right hip that's going to be lifted away from the mat. Just a gentle pressing down of that right hip, maybe just barely thinking about it. You'll feel the right inner thigh lengthen away from you as the hip begins to open a little bit more. And that left leg is already in your single pigeon shape. It'll get deeper once we come into single pigeon, but we keep that we keep that shape of the leg so it becomes more familiar in the body, making single pigeon more accessible. You'll start to blink open the eyes if they're closed. Right hand comes back behind you. You face toward the side. Feet are already wide, knees wide. Bring the knees side to side, coming back into your windshield wipers. Noticing the difference when the knees go to the left versus the right, which is the opposite way of the way you had deer in that last round that we did. So you'll come back to center. Let's just come forward to tabletop. So find your way to hands and knees facing forward. Grab your bolster if you're using one. Place it underneath you the wide way, leaving plenty of room of the mat ahead of you. Walk the hands forward ahead of the shoulders, tuck the toes, lift the hips up and back. Left leg reaches up and back. Bring that left shin ahead of the bolster, foot ahead of the bolster. It's just that left hip and right hip that are on the bolster. And shimmying side to side is a nice way to get even on the bolster. Top of the foot of the right foot is down on the mat. And now you'll start to come in. So lowering the chest, maybe that means using the blocks underneath the hands, the forearms, or the chest. And this side, if you feel anything in that left knee, slowly come back out, transitioning back to downward facing dog, removing the bolster, coming onto your mat and taking thread the needle. Left ankle crosses over the right thigh. And start to lift the head and the neck, press into the hands, lifting the chest, setting any props off to the side if you have blocks. Tuck the right toes underneath you, begin to lift the hips, and the left foot goes back behind you. Finding downward facing dog, move that left leg around however you want, pedaling out the feet or maybe taking big circles with that left knee in one direction and then the other. And once you come back to downward facing dog with both feet on the mat, set the bolster off to the side within reach. Bring the knees down to the mat. Bring the legs forward, so straight out in front of you. And have all the props nearby so you can use them as you want. We're coming into a seated forward fold. I like taking the bolster if you have one and bringing it all the way up against the abdomen. You can certainly do this pose without any props and just fold forward over the legs. And then maybe a block, because I want to rest my forehead on something, but sometimes the block's a little stiff. So then I can put a blanket on top of that for a little extra padding. It's just the forehead that rests down though. So that keeps the nose free. Sometimes I see people smash their nose into the the props in front of them, and then that can be tricky. And you're just building up to as high as you want to go. So don't go too deep into the pose. Turn the palms to face up wherever you are. And then as you open up the back side of the body, just relax. You don't need to do anything. You can let the shoulders round, the upper back round. If the head's resting on something, let that be heavy. This is always a nice pose to follow after single pigeon. We'll start to make our way back up. You can bring the hands onto the props if you're using them, and then slowly lift the head away, setting the props off to the side. Coming into Shavasana. So if you have a blanket and a bolster, we'll use both. You'll take the bolster underneath the knees, bending the legs, and then the blanket can go back behind you as a pillow. If you have something to cover the eyes, grab that. Come on down onto your back. Adjust whatever you need to adjust. So you want that pillow to support the neck and the head, just resting at the tops of the shoulders. Toes can turn out. Arms down by the sides, palms facing up helps you keep the chest open, and then the fingers just curl. Or you could do hands on the body, on the torso. So left hand on the heart, right hand on the belly, or two hands in the same spot works too. Or anywhere that you feel like you need some healing and you want to use the palms of the hands for that. That's easily reachable. Staying right where you are, take a deep breath in through the nose. Slowly back out through the nose. Reach the arms overhead, waking up again, coming back into your body, back into your space. Start to walk the feet in, bending the knees. And you'll roll over onto your right side if that's comfortable. You can keep the head on the pillow if you're using one. Starting to feel things shift inside of you as you come off of your back and onto your side. Use the hands, press yourself up to your comfortable seat, whatever that looks like. Maybe it's a cross-legged seat. It doesn't have to be. Keeping the chest lifted, sitting up tall. Let's bring the hands together right in front of you. Slight bow of the head. Take a moment, honor and acknowledge your heart and spirit, as well as everyone around you, people you know, people you don't know, pets, everyone with a heartbeat. Bring the head back up, blink open the eyes. Namaste. Take your time moving around. Maybe you stay there and meditate. You're set up for that. You can always just turn me off. But thank you for joining. Hope you had a good practice. I'll see you next time.